Hey, Cassandra.
How are you?
Good. What's
That's
it?
good.
1 a.m. there right now?
Yeah, it's 1 a.m.
Right on. Very cool. Well, you are no stranger to Zoom or any of this, so I know that I don't have to go over anything. But do you have any questions for me?
No, I'm good. I feel like I've, this isn't my first rodeo.
Yeah, I know. It's like you've done this a million times. So, um, yeah, I think what we'll do, if it's okay with you, is we'll have Q&A at the end. Does that sound good,
Hmm.
or do you want to pause partway through for questions?
Yeah, the end is good.
Yeah, okay. Delia will be most likely doing Q&A at the
Yep.
end. She'll kind of mediate that for us. Oh, yep, sorry, Delia. Co-host is yours. And let me do that for you too, Cassandra. Uh, should be able to share screens now. And okay, good. All right, cool. I'm so excited about this talk after chatting about third and ninth houses last time we talked.
Well, hopefully I live up to expectations.
Oh, you will. I have no doubt. Yeah, I'm still recovering from a little surgery that I had. So
Mm,
I'm gonna transfer to a laptop and be laying on the couch while I listen to this.
totally okay. I understand that. I've went through it myself back in November. So
Oh,
takes
really?
a
Yeah.
little, yeah, it takes a little longer than you anticipate.
I was not anticipating it would take. I was like, oh, a few days probably. I'm like, okay,
Mm,
no, this is, I mean, it's better than it was. Uh, it's almost been 2 weeks, so it's getting better every day. But it's still like, it's just the strain of holding my body up for maybe more than 30, 40
mm.
minutes starts to wear on me, and then I have to kind of rest for a little bit.
Mm, I hear you. It's never you know, a fun time when you like your mind says you want to do one thing, but your body's holding you back.
Yeah. Yep.
It's
That is
frustrating.
that is exactly how it feels. I'm going to can you stop sharing your screen so I can just
Oh
do
yeah.
the intro really quick?
Um, sure.
And
Let me.
we'll shoot for about 2 hours today. Does that sound
Mhm.
good?
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'll start. Recording's already started, so I'll just go ahead. Welcome, everybody. You can see we've got almost 100 people here already. I'm sure that number is going to go up, but welcome, everybody, to the Winter Speaker Series. Most of you are students of programs here, but if you're a guest, welcome. We're going to be hearing from Cassandra Tyndall today on the topics of the third and ninth houses. Really excited for this talk. This actually, I think Cassandra is starting to get up there in terms of her trophies for repeated guest in our speaker series. Let me show you where you can learn more about the Nightlight Speaker Series if you are a guest here. Go to the Nightlight Astrology website, click on the events page, and you will find that the speaker series is listed. And we usually update with the new speaker series within a month or so after the current series. You can always just sort of check the website to see what's new. Last week, we were guests to, or we hosted Jessica Tiemann on for a talk on Mars, which was really beautiful and interesting. Today, Cassandra's with us. We're going to be talking about the third and ninth houses. And I also want to preview tomorrow's talk. Peter Young, Dr. Peter Young, will be here tomorrow, and he will be giving a talk about the ascendant and the sort of comparisons between classical or ancient views of the ascendant compared to contemporary or modern views of the ascendant. This should be a really interesting talk. The meaning of the ascendant has changed a great deal over time, and he's going to make a case for why we should still consider the way that ancient astrologers thought about the ascendant. And so that's tomorrow at 12 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. That would be 11, starting 11 a.m. Central time. So be sure to sign up for that if you haven't yet. It's all free. The replays of the talks, if you are a student, are posted to our Thinkific page, our class page. But there's a replay link that's posted for a week when you sign up that you can get access to if you can't make it live for any reason. So that is our series, a great lineup this winter. And like I said, we'll probably have the spring series up in another month or so, probably sometime later in February. And I believe that series will probably run late March. So today, one of my favorite astrologers, Cassandra Tyndall, is with us, and a little bit about her. You can read her bio on the website, but she's been practicing about 17 years with a full-time professional practice. She writes, consults, thinks about, talks about, works with people, and is an awesome astrologer. So you can learn a whole bunch about her. She's got her website, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter all listed there if you want to check up with any of her work. Here's her website in particular. And I'm just going to see if I can take us there really quick. You must have a good wait time for your consults, yeah?
Yeah, I do at the moment. Maybe just at this point, you could probably get in, and then I close my books for a little bit because of writing projects that I have at this sort of usually starts around late February, March. But yeah, I do, I try and keep my availability pretty open because I've always been really busy with consultations. So
yeah. The consults are here, classes are here, her blog and her work is here. So I highly recommend that you check it out. That's CassandraTyndall.com. And those links again are all on the speaker series website page of the website. So Cassandra, I'm so happy for you to be here to talk with us about the 3rd and 9th houses and some of the divine meanings of these houses called God and Goddess. We had a chat after you came and spoke with us in our last speaker series, and we got to talking about just astrology and life, and the 3rd and 9th houses came up, and you started talking about them, and I immediately had that feeling that I get whenever I'm in a lecture that really leaves an imprint on me, which is like, oh, I kind of lean in and I'm like, I really like what you're saying. This is new to me. I haven't quite heard this before. The way you're putting it is giving me something new here. And I was like, you got to speak on this subject. Let's do it. And so that's how this talk came to be. I know everyone's going to enjoy it. Cassandra, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks for being here. We're excited to learn with you today.
thank you so much. I'm just going to, let's see, share the screen here. There we go. Sometimes I forget that I've actually been using Zoom long before it was famous. I'm still a complete noob with it, I have to admit. So let's get started. Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. So that was a quote by John Lennon. I'd like to begin this with the quote to explore the idea of what meaning and purpose might mean. So a lot of the time as astrologers, if we are in a situation with a client where we're exploring themes or topics of the life path or the life meaning or the life direction, we naturally gravitate to the MC or the 10th house to look for that one thing or the thing that sort of suggests that this is where the direction or the major life plans are headed. But to be honest, not everybody has a career as such. Some of us have things for sure that we do each day that pay the bills or keep the lights on, so to speak. But that's not necessarily where the individual finds that meaning or purpose. Even those people who have external success in the true sense of what the midheaven or the 10th house symbolize, oftentimes they might report a lack of a feeling of meaning or purpose once those external boxes have been ticked in their life. It's not uncommon for clients to seek astrological counsel when all their eggs have been put into that one path basket. So this might happen if somebody says, my marriage just really isn't holding the joy or the passion that it once had. Or it might mean that their career no longer satisfies them. And this can bring a real loss of meaning that can feel like an undertow that pulls you in and under, and can be a cause of this low-lying sadness in the person's life. As astrologers, we can easily look to transits or progressions or any other type of technique that we favor to find answers to that, to explain the why is this happening now, or to get your client's head nodding when you mention restlessness, for example, if you see a major Uranus transit popping up. Or maybe it's a Neptune one and you're explaining perhaps feelings of discombobulation or a lack of focus. Or maybe it's just the simple weight of Saturn bearing down under that large ringed planet's touch. Pick any planet that you want and we can explain that weather of the moment. We can explain the why, we can explain the where, and we can also explain when that said feeling is likely to subside in the sense of the timing of that transit. But then what? What happens when we can describe that weather, right? What can that person do in the now or in that present moment to bring a sense of meaning or purpose or connection, and gaining greater wisdom and understanding of their sense of self? So that's the topic of today. Thank you, Achuta, for inviting me back again to the speaker series. It's always a thrill and a challenge to start teaching at 1 a.m. And as you did touch on, the genesis of this talk just didn't come from our conversation. It actually came from an article that you wrote for a magazine that I edit here in Australia. And then we did a YouTube conversation about the article, which turned into this long talk, much longer than we anticipated. So Achuta actually wrote a great article for us on the spiritual benefits of astrology. And this is pretty much how the genesis of this talk came about. So that is on my YouTube channel. If you scroll down half a dozen videos or so, you'll find it there.
That's my bad, Cassandra. I totally couldn't. I was like, when did we talk about
Where did we do this? Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's my bad.
And there's also a link if you are interested in Achuta's article and the magazine in of itself. You can always grab that at the end. There's a link there. So funnily enough, this is my third talk for the Nightlight Speaker Series, and I've chosen the third house to do it on. You see what I did there? But unlike the first two talks that were really quite technical, I think I did a version first and then the terms and the Egyptian terms and bounds the second time. This talk is a little bit different, and my idea here is to shed more light on a part of our charts that really does tend to get glazed over a fair bit. I've titled this talk Houses of Meaning and Divine Inspiration, the 3rd and the 9th. They'll be placing a lot more emphasis on the 3rd house, because I really do feel that the 3rd house is a difficult house to grasp, particularly, if you're new to learning astrology, and if, it just seems to get everything about the 3rd house. At least if you've come from a modern background in astrology, or you've just been doing research online. Of course, everyone's branches of education is different, but it always felt a little bit like the miscellaneous house with all these like random meanings just sort of thrown into this one particular house. So for a long time, the 3rd house did feel a little bit like that, sundry house in the birth chart. It had no real symbolism that I could really sink my teeth into it when I first learned astrology. And that was mainly because of what some of us may be familiar with is the concept of the 12 letter alphabet. And if you've never heard that before, that is basically the concept of Aries is, the first house is Aries and Mars. And then the second house is Venus and Taurus. And the third house is Mercury and Gemini, and so on and so on. So the first house becomes Aries, and then the entire zodiac and the planets are overlaid with the signs. And so we get some of the significations of the third house really just are extrapolations of the symbolism of Mercury and Gemini. So obviously there's communication, the short journeys, early education, primarily. In Australia, we would call that primary school. I believe in the US that is called elementary school. We have reading, writing, learning, siblings, cousins, and neighbors. And I would imagine for most of you, like those significations are pretty standard for the third house. So for me, when I really dived into the third house many moons ago, it really did just feel like an extension of what Mercury means and Gemini in particular. So I'm just going to read you a little passage here from the 12 Houses by Howard Suspordis on the third house. So developmentally, the third house corresponds to the stage of life when we begin to crawl and learn to walk. Provided that we feel reasonably secure, the feeling that mother is at home, and with the stipulation that the environment is not too repressive, we naturally relish our greater independence and autonomy. We want to grow and explore. Akin to this development of language and the ability to communicate and name things. All of this sounds like fun, and yet ironically, our growing autonomy and increasing facility to operate in the world confronted us head on with a frustrating sense of our own inadequacy and smallness. There are things out there which are bigger than we are and which are scary and threatening. There are certain laws and limits, some things we are allowed to do or not allowed to say, or are even praised for, while other things we do or say are reprehended with a firm scowl or slap. Welcome to the world of relativity, a jigsaw puzzle. Is it enough of a task to find all the pieces, let alone how to figure out how to put them together? So I don't know about you and your knowledge of the third house thus far, but someone who does have Gemini rising and not a lot of Gemini planets, but more than enough, that feels a little bit more like the description of Gemini and Mercury. By contrast, we could look at some of the more Hellenistic concepts of the third house to give us a little bit more of an embodied concept of what the third house does symbolize. So in the Hellenistic tradition, it is considered to be the house of the goddess. It's where the moon finds her joy. The third house is considered to be the least of the bad, but the least of the good. And the third house does sort of have a little bit of a neutral type of house in terms of its strength. It does form a sextile to the ascendant, though it does form an inferior position. So it does have the capacity to support you, like the ascendant as the individual, though like all cadent houses, this is something I do find in all of the cadent houses, they do tend to take a fair amount of effort to sometimes just get a sense of neutrality. They're not houses where planets or their significations just happen really easily. It does take a fair amount of work. So I often do see the third house as an area or potential for a lot of self-development and personal growth. The sextile aspect to the ascendant, while often seen as like a lesser than aspect in comparison to the trine, the sextile is generally sort of the nature of Venus. It's sweet, it's kind of relatively benign. But in practice, I think sometimes the sextile is an aspect of goadedness. It needs encouragement. I don't know about you, but my report card at school often said something along the lines of, Cassandra is really intelligent and talented. She just needs to apply herself. So that's kind of like our astrological, the sextile is our astrological version of those type of comments. So when we think about the major significations of the third, like those go-to significations that we have, which are, reading, writing, learning, those are all tools that we acquire that support us, but also require effort. It requires effort to learn to read, to learn to write. And then as adults, it still takes effort to maybe make that time to read or that time to write. I know plenty of adults who have never read a book, and I might turn around and say to them, oh yeah, wrote a 4,000 word article today. They're like, I haven't written 4,000 words since high school. So the third house, while it still has that richness and depth, it does sort of speak to concepts that still take a little bit of effort and, work. So knowing and developing thyself is a constant source of effort and growth. So when we're looking at personal development, personal growth, it's not just something that lands in our laps. If we don't embody this type of praxis in our life, we do tend to get stuck or stagnant, just like the nature of a cadent house suggests. So when we think of the third house as one of the houses of meaning and purpose, where might you be lacking that in your own life? So the question might be, where are we not supporting or developing ourselves? And that might then pose the question, like, is it really about the career, or is it really the marriage that is the problem? Or is it the work, that self-development, that personal growth, as other things we will explore? Is it the work of the third house that you might, in actual fact, be avoiding? So some of the other significations which we'll continue to go through is religious observances, priests and priestesses, sacred rites, and divination, particularly by dreams. So let's think about the joy of the moon and her presence in the third house, as opposed to Mercury. So many of the ancient writings regarding the third house do speak to those topics of religious observances, priests and priestesses, our sacred rites, and divination. So some of us might see that as, things to do with planetary magic and altars, which has become a lot more popular in recent years. It might be the runes you pull in the morning, or that tarot card that you might like to draw for a daily message or what have you. It's those sort of like little habits or rituals that we have in our life we can find in this part of the chart as well. So divination is a strong part of the house, of the chart in the third house. Dreams, like the moon, they do come and go. We wake up in the morning and we remember them. And then if you ask at lunchtime, oh, what did you dream about last night? You'll forget about them. So the third house and the connection to the joy of the moon does signify a certain kind of chaoticness to the third house, in the sense that it can be like dreams, it can be difficult to interpret their symbolism. And one thing about dreams is the art of remembering. So I want to explore a little bit about the descent of the soul. And so a Roman writer, I'm going to try and pronounce the name, Macrobius, Ambrosius Theodosius. He was around somewhere between 390 and 430 BC. So he was known for 7 books of Saturnalia, as well as the Dream of Scipio. And he discusses the soul's journey through the 7 spheres as it descends from the highest heavens until its final manifestation, well, not the final, but the manifestation here on Earth. So the soul descends through the Chaldean order of planets. So we start sort of in the firmament of fixed stars, and through the Chaldean order, we go into Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, and Mercury. Then finally, we arrive in that physical body as the moon in the chosen time by the soul before its descent. So I think in some ways science has kind of proven that we're made of carbon and stardust and things, but even in the ancient world, we were all believed to be sons and daughters of the firmament. So as the soul descends through each of the heavenly spheres, the soul picks up attributes from each of the planets, and then finally enters the realm closest to the earth, giving the soul the awareness that it will soon experience some certain like physical movement, growth, and eventual decay. So when the soul is drawn towards the body in this first production of it, it begins to experience material agitation, matter flowing into it. And this is remarked by Plato, where he says that the soul is drawn into the body, staggering with recent intoxication. So this sort of gives the idea that the entry point of the soul into the physical body isn't a comfortable process, almost like it's when you're drunk, where you have to oscillate between reality and the sensation of not being of the self in that moment. So the moon being closest to Earth and the ruler of the forces of generation and corruption, upon our death, we are then returned to the firmament, and we then regress upwards back through the reverse order of the spheres. So probably maybe, 30 years ago or something like that, a fair while ago, I came across a song and I just loved it. And it sort of encapsulates this process a little bit, and I'll spare subjecting you to my taste in music, though I'll read you just a final verse. But if you do want to look up, it's called Beholding the Daughters of the Firmament. And just one of the verses at the end of the song says, I wonder how life will be with a death that I shall never see. I wonder why life must be a life that lasts eternally. So, if you were to look into the lyrics of the whole song, we can sort of see how that all shapes up, which is really quite beautiful. Then I'm going to introduce the concept of the Thema Mundi to try and flesh out some of these concepts as well. So if this is a new diagram to you, if you've never seen this before, it is the idea that it's like a theoretical birth chart of the world in which the entire building blocks of astrology is based on. So the sign of Cancer is the first house, and the moon and Cancer is the first house in the Thema Mundi. The first house is the part of the birth chart and the ascendant where we have the division between being in the physical body, the sublunary sphere, and in the solar hemisphere, which is a little bit more of the spirit. And so this particular diagram is just sort of, not all ascendants are at 15 degrees, but there is a part of the first house when we look at the whole sign where we'll have a portion of our ascendants belong in the solar hemisphere, and a portion of the first house in our ascendant is below. So it's kind of like the first house is the sign, but that ascending degree is like our individual division between the sublunary and the solar. So the moon rules the first house in the Thema Mundi, then the question might be, well, why does she have her joy in the third? So it's a great question. And we'll explore a little bit about that through Greek mythology. So in Greek mythology, Selene was the moon goddess, and she was the sister to Helios, the sun. So Manilius wrote that the third house acknowledges the moon as its mistress, who beholds her brother's realms shining light on her from the other side of heaven. So this illuminates the sibling dynamic between Selene, who is the moon goddess in the third, and her sibling Helios, the sun, who finds its joy in the ninth house. So this then shows that sibling dynamic that we get with the third house. So Helios and Selene were born from deities, and so they personified the lights of the sky. And in this Greek iconography, Selene is riding a moon, she's like a moon goddess, and she's riding a chariot with white winged horses, very, very fancy. And sometimes she was also depicted as driving oxen. And you'll also notice in the image that she does have a what we might see as a crescent moon, or the bull of the horns of the bull rather, on her head. So that would depict the exaltation of the moon in Taurus, like those bull's horns. So this can represent the crown, the crescent moon, or those horns of a bull, reminding us about the exaltation of the moon in Taurus. So we can see that Helios, and I'll show you the image of that god is, he's got that sort of really sort of solar radiant image around his head, that radiant glow. So the sun from the ninth house, where the sun finds its joy, is radiating that light, that's those sunbeams, into the third and shining that light into his sister's temple. So the myth is that he drives his chariot from east to west. Though Selene's monthly sojourn is shorter than Helios because he has the long annual journey as he goes around the zodiac. And this is sort of how we derive the long journeys of the ninth versus the short journeys of the third, because the sun cycle is much longer than the moon. So there's also other ways that we can start to draw the imagery and the symbolism of the third house through mythology, and that is the cult of Selene in southern Greece. And there's a lot of different cultures and traditions in the world that, you know, do similar things. And we would see people travel to this part of southern ancient Greece, and in order to consult with the oracle, and they would sleep, and then the goddess, they would like drink this particular water, they would sleep, and then the goddess Selene, she would interpret their dreams. Hence the dream oracles that are really quite common in the triple goddess of Artemis, Selene, and Hecate, which are the new, full, and dark moons. And I have some images here which are quite nice to look at as well. So this is Selene, the sort of depiction of more of the full moon version. And then we have Artemis, which is a little bit more of the new moon, and Hecate being the more of the dark moon phases. So just this very brief summary of mythology, we start to build some of the blocks of the sibling relationship, of themes of travel, as well as the dreams, the oracles, and divination. So one of the reasons is that in like with the travel is in the ancient world, people just didn't travel for pleasure in the way that we do today. Of course, maybe the last 2 years been a little bit not quite as available. Most people would sort of visit siblings, or they would visit accompanying or neighboring villages that or kin that weren't too far away. Usually travel for long distances was reserved for the rich or for merchants or people who would travel greater distances, the ninth house, for, as pilgrims and making pilgrimages. So for the average person, traveling great distance was not cheap and also fraught with danger. So the moon moving swifter than the sun, we see that the third house obviously likened to the shorter journeys. And it's in these shorter journeys where in the past, people would go to the neighboring villages, they would exchange information, intel, gossip and stories. And you would also, just learn about your local area in that particular way. So we'll go along here. So in our modern day, we can see that the third house, we would depict that perhaps more as our own local village or community. So this might be, where you go to buy your groceries, maybe the gym you go to, or if you visit the library. So it's just that sort of like local radius from your home area. And of course, if someone like me, I don't get out much, but maybe you have to travel across town to work or for whatever other reasons. And that would all be incorporated in your third house sphere. So it might be the kilometer radius or the mile radius that you take on your daily round. We would also see the third house as our inbox, or the letters or the parcels delivered and the information that comes to us through other people. So just like the moon is Earth's satellite in the sky, our local area, the places that we go to sort of almost, every day or every other day, the people we see and the things that we do are what circumambulates around our life. Those things that sort of fall away from our fourth house. So the third house being cadent, it literally falls away from the home and family angle. So it's what we would do when we're not under our roof, so to speak. So with some of that background and maybe just a little bit more depth to the third house that you hadn't maybe experienced or thought about before, this might be a really good opportunity to think about your own life and what do you do most days in these third house realms? What are the habits that you imbue on a daily basis? Do they bring you joy? Do you really enjoy sitting in that traffic every day going to work? Do you have meaningful or uplifting conversations with the people that you encounter every day or not? Do you come home at the end of the day and spend your time doing something that brings you joy with the people that you love? Do you partake in any sort of self-development activities, or do you just like flop on the couch, turn on the telly and complain to your partner about your day? So think for a little minute about your own third house. Which, if any, are there any planets that reside there? And if you don't have anything in the third house, and of course, plenty of people don't, think about the ruling planet on the cusp of the third house. So look at the sign and what's the ruling planet of that sign. And that will tell you, who is managing the third house affairs for you. So maybe you have Saturn in the third house, for instance, and maybe you don't really stray too far from your home. Maybe you tend to be a little bit isolated, whether you're in a remote location or whether you're just sort of isolated in a crowded sort of suburb or city or what have you. Maybe you don't tend to bump into people much on your daily round or when you go and pick up your groceries or whatever. If you have the moon in the third house, that might mean maybe you're a bit of a creature of habit in your day-to-day life and you don't really switch things up too much. If it's the sun maybe your sense of identity and essence is connected or attached to the daily routines that you follow. So when it comes to your daily life, and remember the moon is our body, like it's our incarnated physical being, and it finds joy in the third house. Think about your third house and your life, and where might you be robbing yourself of joy? Where are you being weak, lazy, or cadent? Can you use the goadedness of the third house to support yourself as the third house sextiles to the ascendant? It's important to remember the spiritual and the divinatory ideas around the third house. And a spiritual life or divination or developing yourself takes work. And that's the nature of a cadent house. Cadent houses always take work. So it seems kind of unfair that the moon, the significator of the body, of divine practice, of memory, the mind, finds its joy in a house that's tucked away in a cadent place. I mean, if you've ever tried to lose weight, like you put it on real easy, but it's not easy to take off. So it's a little bit there. But all cadent houses are classified as, I'm going to try and say this at about like 1:30 in the morning, metacosmios. There we go, I got it out. Metacosmios is that interspace, it's the ancient Greek word for the interspace between worlds, which basically renders cadent houses unsuitable for profit, business, or other worldly dealings. So this not of this world type of suggestion that this ancient Greek term suggests describes an environment of the inner realms where perhaps we'd find scholars or mystics or monastics in the chart. This could be religious or scholarly or spiritual pursuits. You know, they generally don't seek or sync well with like taking care of business, so to speak. So it's kind of difficult to be devoted to a spiritual or divinatory practice while being exceptionally active or busy in the business or the professional or the outer worldly sphere, as that was depicted in the ancient world. So as an example, if you're locked away in a monastery, or you are a seer of sorts, or somebody who could foretell the future, it was sort of difficult to devote yourself to those practices while traveling the high seas and trading your spices, for example. So that said, though, even though the third house is generally not suggestive of fame and fortune in the more kind of materialistic or outer worldly or reputational sphere, it is actually where a lot of the richest and most fecund activities can be found in the chart. So while less active cadent houses, the third and the ninth, unlike the other cadent houses, which are the 6th and the 12th, the third and the ninth actually do support the ascendant. So this support comes from some kind of spiritual, devotional, or religious praxis in the life. So therefore, when we see the question of a client maybe asking about meaning or purpose, which many people do externalize as something that's not quite right with their outer life, like maybe the career or the marriage or what have you. Sometimes what the person might actually be asking is a question of the inner life that needs tending with the kind of love and care and nurture of the moon, who finds her joy in that place. So some significations of the moon. So we'll just touch a little bit on the moon. So this picture, I actually took this picture when I was in Seattle nearly 3 years ago now. And I really loved this as a Cancerian. Cancer is ruled, by the moon. And that significations of the third house can be a little bit difficult to pin down or remain constant, especially when it comes to things like our habits and our routines and our rituals in our life. We've all started that fitness regime, or we've all decided we're going to do this one thing, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, but we might do it for a while and we sort of ebb and flow in and out of things. So this also may be one of the ways where we conceptualize the moon's exaltation in Taurus, that to develop the third house in the way that the natal promise suggests, it is a stable growth and sustenance that is required. When we can have the daily habits that are nourishing and can be a mainstay, that fixed nature of Taurus in our lives. So the third house is also of dreams, which is a nighttime occurrence. Like the moon, we can wake up and remember our dream just for a moment, but we can't remember it later in the day. So that's sort of fluctuating, the tides coming in and the tides going out, with that moon finding its joy in the third. Also, too, in our modern solar world, we have access to 24/7 light in a way that we, never had 1,000 years ago. So as a modern day people, we've definitely grown a lot less familiar or comfortable with the chaos and the inner knowing that happens at night. So obviously the third house is a sort of a nighttime part of the sky. But our instincts are heightened at night when the sense of sight becomes diminished. So therefore, our other senses become more amplified. And that is that sort of the moon and the instincts in particular. So beyond our basic needs for food, money, shelter, the moon and the third house may show us what other needs we have, but may not be tending to as a part of daily life and our rituals and routines. So the 10th house of career and public life shares no spectral relationship to the third house of the inner life. So there can be that sort of tension between what do we need to do in the third versus what the MC or the career suggest. Of course, there are some exceptions. If your midheaven falls in the 9th or the 11th, there will be, another layer to that there. So questions of meaning and purpose really begin with what are you not doing on a daily basis towards something that brings you joy? So where are you over focusing perhaps on responsibility, material progress, the demands of the external world, while not tending to that inner life? So which daily habits have you lost sight of that work well for you? I've asked clients this many times over, and they can tell me what have you, through maybe taking care of kids, work, all of the sort of boxes of life, and then I'll turn around and say, well, what little things do you no longer do for yourself that really work well? Where have you lost God in whatever form that word means to you? Then the second question becomes, well, what work, the third, the cadent house, are you avoiding? And sometimes that can be a question too. We all know what we could and should do to develop more richness in our lives, but we sometimes do avoid it. So the cadent nature of the third house, of course, says that it's going to take a little bit of work to maintain or to develop and maintain that relationship with the third house. So a spiritual life, a life of knowledge, a life of solid daily habits that support the ascendant, they just don't happen. They take effort. So usually these efforts are the first to fall by the wayside when you're, as John Lennon says, busy making other plans. So let's have a bit of a look at some ancient guidance for some meanings of planets. In the third house, please keep in mind these are very brief rules for interpretation and to be just used as a guideline. In the writings and of course in actual practice, you would explore so many other factors such as maybe sect, planetary condition, aspects, malefics, benefics, and all of that layering is way beyond the scope of this webinar. Remember that these were generally seen as lazy houses, and the activity of the third and ninth was generally considered to be a little bit lazy in the sense it wasn't good for the material, ambitious, or the worldly life. And I think that's why perhaps some of these interpretations do seem a little bit harsh. Okay, so please don't take them too much to heart, because a lot of the ancient writings can be a little brutal. So Saturn in the third house makes natives slow and sluggish, seeking no kind of income. If it's in the ninth, Firmicus tells us, will make famous magicians, renowned philosophers, or temple priests noted for the reputation for magic, seers, diviners, and astrologers. Now, I've seen plenty of people with Saturn in either the third or the ninth, and I'm one of those people, and I am slow and sluggish. I can tell you right now, it takes me forever to do something that shouldn't take me forever. But what I see with these people is that they just generally don't fit into organized structures of education, religion, or spirituality. Now, this is going to be especially true if Saturn is not in its best condition, or maybe the contra malefic of the sect. They may reach great heights or authority in a certain position, but they don't fit in, or they tend to go against the grain of those established traditions in some way. One thing to remember about Saturn is it is an outsider. And I do see this dynamic in Saturn in the third or the ninth, particularly with people of my vintage, which are the mid to late 70s babies, because we have either Saturn in Cancer or Saturn in Leo. And where, of course, Saturn is in a poor condition. So sometimes people might reach a great height, and then one person that I'm thinking of reached PhD in their philosophy, alchemy, and magic degrees, but and religious degrees, but just was like, yeah, academia is not for me. I don't want to be a professor. So just totally abandoned that part of life. So that was an example of Saturn in the ninth. So if Jupiter is in the third house, it says neither good nor bad, but always a balanced mixture. And I mean, that is Jupiter. It does sort of seek to help, or doesn't want to rock the boat in its nature. So sometimes possessions are lost, and sometimes unexpected riches are attained. So while they might be lost, they'll also be gained. If Jupiter is in the ninth house, we see interpreters of the gods who are able to foretell the future. Some will follow the profession of priests. Others will have duties in temples. So they might be connected to sort of religious, even travel. You know, it can not just be about the religious side of things, because of course travel is one way that we can really, you know, expand our vista and seek meaning and purpose through that experience. So through working with clients, Jupiter in the third or the ninth, I have seen experiences around fluctuations of fortune that come and go here. But generally speaking, there is some kind of quite devotional quality to any type of spiritual, magical endeavors that they might take on. And they'll tend to have fairly good outcomes with it. So if they decide to study something or teach something or travel or what have you. But of course, it will depend somewhat on Jupiter's condition. So Mars fame is indicated by Mars in the 3rd house, but only after greatest toil. The native will desire the goods of others, be envious of all, and will have evil knowledge of a certain very grave crime. So some of these writings are kind of, not how we would talk about astrology today, that's for sure. But in the 9th, it was considered to be favorable in regard to the life and fame. So either way, we can see that there's a lot of work where Mars is concerned, and the naturally malefic nature of Mars tends to symbolize that, by and large, things don't always come easy, or the struggle to gain the recognition or rewards from the efforts doesn't always arrive. So of course, it depends on the condition of Mars. For instance, one example I'm thinking of was someone who worked really, really hard for their family, had Mars in Capricorn in the 9th, but it was a day chart and just never really felt that appreciation or recognition that they were really seeking from that sort of house of God, like look at all the work that I'm doing and wanting to sort of maybe have that, potentially like that recognition or be seen as a God figure to the family because they were the provider. So the sun indicates an evil death and makes the native sickly, but respectable and serious in counsel. They will marry and have children later in life. So that's if the sun is in the 3rd, according to Maternus. And if the sun is in the 9th, he talks about making images of gods or worship divine images. They decorate gods, design their display of holy songs, and gain honor and fame from this activity. So the sun finds its joy in the 9th. So it's going to have a brilliant expression in the 9th house. And I see it quite commonly when I have clients in sun in the 9th, or particularly sun in the 3rd, that they will tend to have some kind of health or vitality issue show up there. It could mean that there's a lot of effort involved to maintain that body vitality, or the physical vessel is used so much as like a devotional tool that the spirit can tend to override the body sometimes. So one person I'm thinking of many moons ago, he was an Ayurvedic practitioner, and he would just get so into channeling the yoga and devoting himself to his practice that he would often let his own health deteriorate as part of that, that sort of service, and shining that stable, enduring sunlight into those houses. Venus in the 3rd house, Firmicus mentions that mainly if Jupiter is in aspect to it, it will be considered a favorable placement. Venus predicts a wife from a temple, a priestess, or the daughter of a priest. If Mercury is with Venus, the native themselves will be prophets, temple attendants, or in charge of rituals. If Venus is in the 9th, it talks about constant attacks from some demon. Natives go around sordid and unkempt, or stay in temples prophesizing, claiming that they are announcing the will of the gods. They are often the interpreter of dreams, and these effects are often stronger if Saturn is present. So when we read some of these ancient writings, there's so much talk about divination and temples and gods, which is something that really kind of it's just not sort of spoken about quite as much nowadays. So even though Venus in the 3rd and the 9th, for the most part, I feel like it's a bit of a negative write-up, Though I do know a lot of people with Venus in these houses who are generally a little unkempt, I have to admit, but they do tend to attract a certain type of popularity through their mystical knowledge, or the, you know, the stories that they share, and the things that they know through, you know, being in temples, or being in, you know, whether it's different type of experience that might have involved, you know, whether it's psychedelic stuff, or their travels, or, you know, their experiences. In a way, they sort of gained a bit of popularity there. So Mercury in the third makes for priests, magicians, healers, astrologers, men through their own efforts discover things not handed down by tradition. So it's almost like the gnosis you get through being that tradesperson that Mercury can be, like sort of more the doing, as opposed to, you know, the gnosis, which is a little bit more suggested by the ninth, the things that are handed down. If Mercury's in the ninth, Firmicus says they are quarrelsome, contentious arguers, claiming that they know themselves, claiming that they themselves know whatever is suggested to them, and never able to finish anything carefully. I think there's a natural affinity with Mercury and in the third house, because the moon and Mercury are both significators of the mind. So Mercury has that more, so we've got the moon in her place of joy in the third house, which is the more divinatory, the chaotic, the subliminal, the sublunary, the subconscious, the stuff that is not able to be fully articulated by the moon, but perhaps felt or experienced or embodied. But Mercury there can help you articulate it, or rationalize it, or explain it. So say, for example, somebody who may be very sort of clairvoyant or psychic, they get sort of all the messages in symbol, but they have to then interpret it. So Mercury in the third house is classed as quite a gift. So the moon, so if the moon is in the third house, Firmicus says, will make the native's mother low class or tainted with some kind of scandal. And I remember when I first read that, I was like, wow, like, let me think about that. Can I think about any examples about somebody who has the moon in the third and a scandalous mother? And then I realized that's my dad and my grandmother. So my grandmother married a man who had left the seminary. He was, at the time, he was about 18 months of being a fully fledged Catholic priest. Met my grandmother. Shortly thereafter, they were married. My dad arrived, my auntie arrived. But because my grandfather had spent a long time in the seminary, he didn't get to have, you know, those years as a young man, and he couldn't really fully be responsible as a father, a provider, a husband, what have you. So my nana divorced him. This was like 1959, where people just didn't get divorced through choice. And so my nana ended up being a single mother of 2 children. She started up her own business so she could feed her kids. So divorced. By 1961, I think it was, she opened up a hairdressing salon in a part of the city where they lived, which was quite like it was a Jewish community primarily. So here she is, divorced, Catholic, flaming red hair, you know, just total talk of the town for that period of time. So, like, you know, very respectable woman, but very scandalous for the day. So there we go. That's an example of how that's played out. So the ninth house, so if the moon is the ninth, in the ninth, forces some to cultivate rites of the most important religions, and others carry on businesses for women. So I have seen instances where someone has the moon in the ninth where they adopt a different religion to maybe the one that they were born into or raised under. And sometimes I see like the moon being the most symbolic of women, that might have work connected or do business with women in some way. So depending on the condition of the moon, of course, I've also seen that there can be like almost like this glutinous or gluttonous appetite for physical satiety as well. And that might be food or drugs or alcohol. If they haven't got that spiritual kind of praxis in their life or more connected to something greater than, let's get drunk on the weekend type of attitude. Though that said, when it's done perhaps in a more conscious way, this can lead to states of opening up a channel to divine interpretation. So this might be through like channeling or breath work, or even some people will use various types of, drugs like mushrooms and things, psychedelics and things to sort of numb that sort of body to get out of that moon third house and sort of get into that ninth a little bit more. One of the ways I've often described the connection between the ninth and the third is seeing, growing up, I would see people pray the rosary beads, and, it would be through, maybe like thumbing or fingering the beads in your pocket and as you're praying. So it was that bringing down something, whether it's the rosary beads or any other type of, spiritual, symbolic sort of thing, maybe kneeling down to pray or setting up an altar in the home, or the things that we do sort of from a physical standpoint can help sort of ground us so much that our bodies or our minds are almost kind of distracted or opened, and we can just focus on that prayer or that connection or whatever that is. So getting out of the physical body in some fashion, might be through breathing or what have you, where you can then sort of open up those sort of divinatory downloads from the ninth. So the moon draws down the reflection of the sun into the third house. So she brings the spiritual, the religious, and those academic vistas and the way that the world can open up for you, and brings them down to earth in that present or physical reality. So Valence tells us that the third house can be about revelations from God and go spread the good news to your kin and neighbors. It also suggests that the preparation of rituals, rites, and observances that go into forming a tangible expression through the ninth. So one of my probably earliest like conscious memories, or like where I understood what was going on, of course I saw plenty and was involved in plenty as a kid, but didn't really sort of make those connections. But I remember in my 20s when I went to my first Indian wedding, and I'd never been to one before. Of course, everything was totally different to what I was used to. And I went there with a really great friend of mine, and we were setting up flowers. And I remember one of her aunties was explaining to me that like every flower was positioned in a certain way or had a certain meaning, and everything meant something. So the setup of the wedding was sort of more of a spiritual experience done through these flowers and everything in the way that it was set up. So we might see this as religious altars. I remember as a kid growing up, there was always, not in my home, but in my school and other places, there were statues of Mary everywhere. Now I have planetary altars all through my home. We also have other ways that we observe rites and rituals in our life, even if we aren't spiritual or religious in any type of way. We have holy days, holidays, as suggested by the ninth, where we gather with our friends or family. But that ninth house symbolism, of course, that might be based on, your culture, your religion, or even the city that you live in. Like if you have a public holiday, for instance, might be 4th of July or 26th of January here, where we will just sort of gather with friends and family. So these were the small offerings that we did that was in contrast. So the small offerings being the third house, that is contrast to that one great pilgrimage, which some will be to Mecca. For others, it might be to the motherland, like where we're from, or that bucket list destination, which is more that ninth house signification. So again, the question is, when we're looking at meaning and purpose in the birth chart, is what do you do on the daily, the third house, that opens up the possibilities of the ninth? So that might be developing an amazing spiritual relationship with God in whatever way that means for you. Or maybe it is, I just really want to go to Bali. So am I saving my money on a daily basis to go? It could be as simple as that, depending on the client and the nature of your conversation. So what work do you do on a daily that can lead to that one big thing that you're holding importance to in your life? And if you're not sure what that is, and of course, when our clients come to us, they're not sure. So there's a few ways that we can look at it. That would be planets in the third, the planetary ruler, and maybe connections as well between the third and the ninth. So the rulers of those houses, and perhaps even the first as well. So if there's some connection with those rulers, it might give us some indication as to what we could, suggest or counsel for the person. So we've discussed a lot about ritual, spiritual, divine, religious. And for many of us, like, as I mentioned, that type of life is not really something that is what, not everyone wants that. It's not a priority. It's not something, some people really turn against that type of language as well. That said, though, we can still have ritual in our life. So what is a ritual? I just call it a routine with meaning. And we have so many routines in our life that are so automatic that we don't even give a meaning anymore. And that might be brushing our teeth. It's something we do. It's a routine, just doesn't have meaning. So we often forget like what pleasures are available to us when we make them a priority. So when we think about pleasure, we often look maybe to the fifth house, like Venus. But when we're looking at pleasure or ritual with meaning, if you think about the third house and the place where the moon finds her joy, and the moon is exalted in Taurus, which is Venus's sign. So how can we find maybe more joy in our life that has meaning, that has purpose, that has some kind of that Taurian substance to it, that might be a little bit more than some of the fun and frivolity stuff that we would find in the fifth? So we often do forget about what pleasures are available to us. Or, we easily forget about what they are. When life gets busy, maybe the money gets tight, or we generally lose our mojo, we really do forget to make ritual a thing. So it doesn't have to be a big deal. It could be that yoga class that you used to do once a week, but you haven't done it in months. Maybe it's finally reading all those books you bought that are on the shelf that you haven't read yet. Maybe it's also about being a tourist in your own city. So taking the third house signification a little bit. When was the last time you just walked around the city or explored nature in your, the town that you live in? What about that journal you wanted to start writing in, when the 2022 was the new year? So some of the ideas I've explored with clients when we've had these types of conversations is, I've had, there's one particular client had a stellium in Leo in the 3rd house. And when he was a teenager and stuff, excuse me, was in bands and really into music and all that stuff. But, life with many kids and all the things, music really got in the way and didn't get to play anymore. So we talked about it and how much pleasure was found through playing the guitar, and just how like in the zone, and how much more creativity and joy and just general happiness being in the body, but sort of opening something else, how that process eventuated for him. So I encouraged him just to rip out that guitar and start shredding that thing. And the kids, do it in front of the kids. Like, you may not play the songs that you want, but if you can do it like with your kids, like combine that, then they're just going to think you're king and you get to enjoy yourself. So that stellium in Leo being sort of seen and recognized and adored at the same time. So one client with the moon in Cancer in the 3rd house recognized how she had actually lost sight of her own spiritual practice instantly when I started talking about themes of, what habits have you lost sight of that, that really sort of support you, or, what did you used to do for yourself that you're not really doing anymore? So we started talking about habits that support her personal habits and protect her sphere. She was already quite right into magic and different protocols around that anyway. So just reminding her of that. And sometimes that is what the 3rd house is really about. It's about restoking that lunar memory, that memory that's more in the subconscious as opposed to in the mind, that, don't forget this, but the 3rd house is a bit more about remembering. And it's also, again, the 3rd house takes work. We have to make these little things meaningful and, really prioritize or make the time for them in some way. And this is the idea of the 3rd house too, and what can make it a little bit difficult in some ways, because the nature of the moon is very fleeting. Sometimes we see her, sometimes we don't, and she moves very quickly. And just like the dream, when we wake up and we remember, but try and recall that dream at lunchtime, we just can't do that. But even in these fleeting moments, they are still moments in life that give meaning. It might be that in my 20s, I did a lot of yoga. I don't really do it anymore, but I did a lot back in the day. And there would be those times where you just, I don't know, the connection happened, or just that fleeting moment where it's like, that's what they're talking about when you do this stuff. It might be if you are trying to connect from a religious or spiritual or divinatory type of place, like it's almost like you get that connection or that flow or that download, but it's never a constant stream. And so it's like these meaningful rituals or routines with meaning in our life, then it doesn't have to be a constant stream of feeling this immense satisfaction or joy or purpose. It's just committing to the small regular practice that has that sort of compounding interest effect. So I thought I would read another little passage for you today. And on the theme of sort of religious and spiritual, I picked something from the Bible, and I'm not religious at all, but here I am. Short and sorrowful is our life, and there is no remedy when a man comes to his end, and no one has been known to return from Hades. Because we were born by mere chance, and hereafter we will be as if we had never been, because the breath in our nostrils is smoke, and the reason is a spark kindled by the beating of our hearts. When it is extinguished, the body will return to ashes, and the spirit will dissolve like empty air. Our name will be forgotten in time, and no one will remember our works. Our life will pass away like the traces of a cloud and be scattered like mist that is chased by the rays of the sun and overcome by its heat. For our allotted time is passing of a shadow, and there is no return from our death, because it is sealed up and no one turns back. Come, therefore, let us enjoy the good things that exist and make use of the creation to the full as in youth. Let us take our fill of costly wine and perfumes, and let no flower of spring pass by us. Let us crown ourselves with rosebuds before they wither. Let none of us fail to share in our revelry. Everywhere, let us leave signs of enjoyment, because this is our portion and this is our lot. Let us oppress the righteous poor man. Let us not spare the widow nor the grey hairs of the aged. But let our might be our law of right, for what is weak will itself to be useless. So that is from the Wisdom of Solomon, or the Book of Wisdom. So I guess like when we break that down, I think there's so much astrological symbolism in that, talking about costly wine and perfumes, and talking about our lot of life and clouds of mist being burned up by the sun. And I think it's a really good reminder that the third house can, we're not drinking the most expensive wine and dousing ourselves in the most expensive perfume all of the time. But when we do have those moments, enjoy them, where we do get to, have those fleeting pleasures or those fleeting religious, spiritual, divinatory connections, embrace them. So we do spend so much of our life trying to achieve a certain outcome, a goal, or a desire in the future, that we really do sometimes forget to be like here in the now and in our bodies, that our souls and spirits are embodied to experience pleasure. And the moon does find her exaltation in a Venus-ruled sign after all. So perhaps the true meaning of life is to remember to always include pleasure as a form of daily habit. Maybe not to the exclusion of all things, but to remember to live richly in those fleeting moments. The moon helps us to remember the past, remember our connections to spirit and to God. It is through our routines with meaning we remember what spirit or God is in our life. There are the universal type of significations of the moon, but then there's also our individual ones as well. What is meaningful or joyful to me is also going to be very different for you, though much of it in of its essence will be very similar. The areas as described by the third house don't have to have that rhyme or reason of that mercurial nature, because in of its essence, the third house is lunar in its nature. It is the lunar consciousness that comes alive in the third house. It's the changeable, the chaotic, the feminine, rather than that solar consciousness, which, our modern life tends to promote. So some of our third house symbolism by its own nature doesn't always fit in very neatly like that jigsaw puzzle. Okay, so sometimes it's also understanding that the third house will ebb and flow. That tide will come in and it will go out. The habit will come, it sticks for a bit, and then the habit will, fall away. And it does take a constant work. So of course, it will depend on the setup in your own chart. One thing that I always found really interesting when, as astrologers, and people come to us, I'd love to learn more about astrology. How do you like work with the moving planets, and where do I start? Blah, blah, blah. And one of the first things we would suggest to someone who doesn't really know much more than their star sign or their sun sign, we would say, watch the moon. Just watch your moods, or, where are you active, where are you not so active? And we would often suggest keep a moon journal. So literally we're writing it down, third house. And that form of writing, observing, and remembering helps us learn astrology. So note the moon signs, as they observe your feelings, actions, and energy levels. And it's like your very own lunar calendar, just like the memory of all of our ancestors, regardless of our heritage. Many of our ancestors would have, engraved some type of lunar calendar onto bones with 28 or 29 notches on them. The first discovery of these types of bones was in a town in Germany, estimated to be 350,000 BC to 300,000 BC. So, when we think about how old the remembering of the moon, the observing of lunar cycles is, it makes Hellenistic astrology just seem like yesterday. So these kind of bones have been found all over Europe, Africa, West Asia, and here in Australia too. So the moon has such a huge influence in shaping our world. We know she controls the tides. Her cycle is very similar to the female menstrual cycle. Though much of what the moon offers us is largely forgotten in this patriarchal kind of world. So our divine feminine practices, regardless of gender, regardless of all of that, has largely really been lost in the modern day. So the moon is the source of all kind of fertility, that fecundness, not just fertility in terms of babies and children, but to be able to give birth to something, to give birth to a creative endeavor, or a practice, a ritual, or meaning to sort of start something. So from the 28-day female cycle to the tides, to these carved bones, to farmers' almanacs, to planting gardens, the moon has sort of governed all of those things. And these are parts of our life, like farming or growing plants, does take that tenderness and that observing and knowing when the right time is to do this or plant that, is a very big part of the observances and the rituals that create that fertility. It just sort of doesn't just kind of happen. So the moon and her shaping and changing moods have really guided us through time. So the third house can remind us to connect back to our own waters, to our own rhythms, and to our own fertility and growth. It may not be the external or seen growth or success, but the type that radiates from within and then reflects back out into the world. So that's our exploration of the third and the ninth house. There's so much more I could say about that, but I guess we can open up for questions. So I'm not sure who's here. Delia, hey, good to see you.
Hey, Cass, good to see you too, as always. Did you say that there was going to be a link to Achuta's article?
Yeah.
Okay.
There it is down at the bottom there. So I'll pop that in there. I can send it to you if you want to make separate. Yeah. I can
Yes,
do
please.
that.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And I see also the link to your website as well. Wonderful. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that this has been a brilliant talk. I've gotten so
Oh,
much out of it.
oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but something I really enjoy about your talks is that you will explain the philosophical rationale behind things, but you also give a lot of tools for how to apply that to readings and to make it very practical. And I always appreciate that. And I know the
Oh, thank
students do
you.
too. You have good feedback from that. All right, so let's jump into Q&A. Shall I read them out to you?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so Karine asks, the nodes are going to be in my 9th house, 3rd house axis for the next 18 months. I'm a Virgo rising. Will you address their meaning today?
The nodes through the 3rd and the 9th. So these are the transiting nodes, did you say, or the natal?
Transiting.
Yeah, well, I would say this is a perfect time to really start to develop and embody some of these 3rd, 9th house significations. So Virgo rising. So we've got Scorpio in the 3rd. So, you know, that to me would feel like an emptying out, so to speak, you know, that South node, Scorpio, like there is that purification process. So, you know, obviously there's so many things in the chart. You might want to look to the rulers of the nodes and, you know, what they might be doing natally. But I would sort of see that South node in Scorpio as a chance to maybe really clean up some of those daily habits. What might you need to shed? What is blocking you potentially from maybe having a little bit more of a divine life as a sort of way to describe that. So, and it might also be having to look towards the 9th house as well with the North node there and being perhaps a little bit more open to different opportunities that come through because of course Uranus is impacting that a little bit as well. So it really might be about changing perspectives or being willing to open up to new opportunities and what you might have to adjust or shift or change on the daily to help you make that happen.
Thank you, Cass. That's lovely. Another question about the nodes from Kate. Could a lunar node have a joy in the 3rd?
It's a good question, and it is something I have thought about. Well, in some respect, you might think yes, because they are the lunar nodes and the moon has its joy in the 3rd. But especially in the Indian traditions of astrology, the nodes are ultimately seen as malefic influences. I'm still not always sold on that. I think the nodes are so, obviously from a collective or maybe kings, rulers, you know, leaders and things like that, eclipses generally are not harbingers of happy times. But I have seen so much in practice in everyday people's lives, of course, that the eclipses can really, especially in fixed signs, that the changes that they promise don't always feel comfortable or easy, but they can put life on fast forward a little bit. So when I'm talking the nodes with people and it's very active in their chart, I often suggest to them, like, watch for those decisions or watch for those moments where it feels like an invisible hand is pushing your back. And you don't have to think rationally. You don't have to, play out the pros and cons in your mind. It's almost like, if I don't do this, then like I have to do this. They're very guided. They're very disruptive though. So because they are disruptive, they feel uncomfortable, but they're also like these sort of portals or openings for faster change. And so depending on your own, like some of us are like, yeah, let me get on the roller coaster. And for others, the idea of change is enough to bring on an anxiety attack. So we all have different relationship to the nature of change. So when eclipses are active in a natal chart, you almost have to start with what is your change baseline? Is it, strap me in, I'm getting on this thing, or is it like, no, I'm not going anywhere near that roller coaster? So that's something to keep in mind too. So I find them can be a little bit exciting, potentially natally. Yeah.
I hope that's a good answer to your question, Kate. Okay, from Anonymous, are there any other resources that you can recommend for learning about the third house?
Yeah. I guess like the nature of the third house itself, it's a bit of a hodgepodge, mishmash of things. My advice is stay away from the modern astrology books because it just defaults to Mercury and Gemini. And, you know, I have Saturn in my third house, so it's like that just doesn't wash with me. So I would go for the ancient stuff. Just hang on a second. I've got a couple of Firmicus Maternus books here, but this one here, I'm just going to hold that up. Of course, there's different covers, but it is the Libri 1/8. What is really good about this book is it kind of gives you rules. It's kind of structured. Of course, it's very old fashioned. And, you know, I've used some of these examples in this talk, but it can kind of go, okay, well, if someone's got this and they've got that, but then there's an aspect from that planet, here's what happens. And of course, you have to extrapolate that. Like, I wouldn't take it as a hard and fast rule, what was said in the 4th century as in today. But it is, I definitely think the Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice by Firmicus Maternus is really quite interesting. And it does give like in Indian astrology, where it's like, you know, these different planets form yogas, and this is what that means. This is kind of what Firmicus has done for us.
Thanks. Which translation do you have for the?
Yes, it
Libri
is
8?
Jean Rees Bram.
Bram. Okay, thank you. Okay, and do you have any books or references that you would recommend to learn more about the cult of Selene?
No, not really. I don't have anything to learn more about that. There's so many versions of this in all kind of cultures. You know, if anyone's watched Vikings, everyone went to the seer in that show. Like, everyone has that. One other, just thinking about the previous question, is I don't know if it's out yet, but Demetra's Volume 2, which I have a copy of, I have a proof copy, excellent resource for houses. So 3rd and 9th are covered in that. Yeah, no, I don't have a great deal of that, just outside of sort of the Greek mythology that's covered in the astrology books. I've not really dealt a great deal in Greek mythology outside of its direct references to astrology.
I've seen a few astrologers who have Demetra's 2nd volume already, and I
Oh,
always think it's such a
fantastic.
flex.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, good. I didn't know what stage of things it was at.
Oh, but I don't think it's publicly available yet. I'm just always so jealous when I see that someone has it already. As far as I know right now, I might not be up to date with it. But
okay. Yeah, I'll have to ask Aaron. I don't know where it's up to. Yeah.
but that's something for us all to look forward to when it comes out.
Mm.
Okay, so question from William. Is it correct to assume that the judgments for planets in the 3rd house also applies to the ruler of the sign in the house?
Yeah, for sure. Of course, there's a couple of ways of looking at that. So you can see, like, I sort of see planets in a house as a tenant, but the ruler of the house is always going to be the landlord. Okay, so you sort of need to work with both. So what was the actual question that was being asked again? Sorry.
Is it correct to assume that the judgments for planets in the third house can also apply to the ruler of the sign in that house?
I guess I'm just trying to understand what you mean about judgments, like how you would interpret. Is that like, let me think how I would describe that. I mean, the planets in the house, like sometimes location can be more immediate than rulership. It depends on the planet. Like you would want to see the condition of it. Is it malefic, benefic, sector favor, out of favor? You can go through many of the different Hellenistic rules that and try and get more juice from that perspective. So oftentimes the location will be more immediate than rulership, but you'd also want to look at the lord of that house too. And is it making an aspect to that house? So is the manager of that house or the landlord, is it overseeing its tenant? Is it taking care of it? Is it maintaining the property? That sort of thing. So you can definitely look to the lord of the third to get more insight or guidance as to maybe some of the routines with meaning or the practices that you might be wanting to look at. So like, for instance, the ruler of my third house is in the second. So, there's no relationship, but I do see how it works in my life. Pretty much like the more I'm connected, the more money I make. When I'm distracted or I'm in other places or I'm not devoted to what I'm called to do, then I can see that immediate disadvantage or advantage there. Yeah.
Thank you. But I mean, the planet, the ruling planet, influences the house. It's not the other way around, right? So if someone has Sagittarius in the third, Jupiter will influence Sagittarius, but third house significations will not influence Jupiter. Would that be a correct statement?
It would depend if Jupiter aspects the house.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. If the moon has her joy in the third, why would Maternus give a negative signification, such as a scandalous or low-class mother?
I know, right? And then I had an immediate example of that. I really did sort of struggle with that, and I had to sort of think about it for quite some time. I guess I just had to sort of think, is it like maybe a cultural or a period of time that might have led to that? Maybe if the woman or the mother was locked away in some monastery, or she was a diviner of some kind, maybe not seen quite as motherly perhaps in that time period. Were you tending to your children, or were you like in the temple and helping people? I don't know, and I don't have an answer for it. But I found it very interesting too, because you would imagine that the moon finding its joy in the third and then having that placement would be joyful, but it doesn't seem to be. But, look, there's what the ancient texts say, and, you can use them as a guide or a template. And a lot of it sometimes is so irrelevant now, and you have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, because I see so many people who have the moon in the third who do have, really great connections with the third house, and they feel very kind of grounded and embodied in that place. But it was also interesting that my grandmother certainly wasn't a scandalous woman, but externally, like how she was perhaps seen, maybe she was aware of her position. And, in the ancient world, everything was based on your reputation as a woman, right?
Something I found about the ancient texts is that they tend to shake up my, I just had the word just flew out of my mouth. The oversimplifications that we can sometimes make about planets or houses just introduces a different way of thinking about things. It's interesting. Okay, from Sharon, can you please tell me the Bible entry that you read from earlier?
Yep, it is Wisdom, chapter 2, verses 1 to 11.
Okay, thank you. Question from Deborah. The 10th has also been described as something one does daily and not necessarily a career. Can you reconcile the difference in meaning with the third?
Yeah, I do know what you mean about that, because sometimes I even do it myself. Like I'll describe the career as more a vocation or a calling. And for some people, it may not be directly related to a career in the most basic sense of the word. So, I guess how would I reconcile that? What someone does on the daily, like, for some people that might be part of their spiritual practice or what they do on the daily. But I think like the third house, when you think about some of the ancient significations of it, is a little bit more about remaining connected to something that is like it's in the daily, but beyond the daily. And for some people, like that career will be a part of that. And for some people, it won't be. Yeah. I don't know if I have a really great answer at this time of the morning for that, but yeah, it's definitely something. And I don't necessarily also think it has to be one thing or the other. Like you can have both in the life. There's plenty of people that, have multifaceted lives as opposed to just the career or their spiritual practice being part of their career or combined with it somehow.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Anonymous. Can you speak more on the moon-mind connection? Do you associate the third house with writing? And if so, in what way is the lunar association to writing different to the Gemini-Mercury one?
Okay, so I definitely see writing as a part of the third house. I have Saturn in the third house, and all my friends and peers in astrology, they always talk about how I am just like a machine when it comes to the words. I could just pump them out, and it's a labor. Like it's a true labor, but I don't know, I can do it. So it was the combination of like the moon and Mercury, I believe the question was. So we have the moon in her joy there. And so I'm just trying to articulate my thoughts. And so we have these versions of the moon, Selene, Artemis, Hecate. And then we have Hermes or Thoth, which was like the Egyptian god that was associated with language and writing. And so the myths kind of got brought together, and it was that Hermes Trismegistus. I'm going to try and say that at like nearly 3 a.m. Where he became the sort of Hermes thrice great, and he was the sort of overlord of astrology, alchemy, and magic. And so we do get those threads of Thoth, which was the Egyptian god of writing and language, coming through there. So yeah, definitely like writing, speaking, very much third house topics. And one other thing I remember about the moon as mind, and I think about language and the things that we say, and you'd be like, okay, I'll keep that in mind. And it means like you're accumulating knowledge or you're keeping something in your mind, and the moon sort of seeks to kind of hold on to things, particularly in the exaltation in Taurus. And I also remember like really early in my astrology studies, it was John Frawley that told me this actually. He said like if your moon and Mercury are in the same sign or they share an aspect, you'll have a really organized mind. And I just always kept that in mind as having like the two significators of mind either in the same place in the birth chart or making an aspect to each other. And I've seen that show up sort of more often than not. So the moon, like we have the rational mind, Mercury, and then we have the lunar mind, which is more about the memory or the primordial or the instinctual, like the stuff that is sublunary and not able to be easily articulated. It's a felt type of language as opposed to the spoken or the thought. I sometimes see Mercury as causation and the moon is the correlation. It's like, well, this kind of matches that, but I can't prove it or I can't explain it. And, those kind of like lunar, maybe sort of more feminine type of way of connecting dots. That's not as like if you've ever tried to have like an emotional argument or discussion with a partner, and me as the female is like sounding like, I can't string a sentence together. And then the man will often just be so clear cut and rational and straight for the jugular and gets to the point. And then it's just very different type of way of expressing different type of thought. But if it's together by sign or making an aspect, I guess the suggestion here is that you can kind of do both, either oscillate between both or articulate your feelings in a more clear way, perhaps. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So the moon is a more intuitive kind of connection making, right? And the mind is more
exactly
rational.
For sure.
From Danielle, would a person with no planets in the third house look to the Lord for developing a good routine or spiritual practice?
Yeah, look to the ruler of the third and look to the ruler of the ninth. And is there any connection there? That's a good place to start. And also like consider the moon as well. Like she has her joy there. So it's definitely worth, the moon might help you to remember.
From Anonymous, does the moon in the opposite house, the ninth, take a different definition against the joy of the moon? What would be the definition of such a positioning? Could this mean an extra work of deliverance from minuscular activity into grander understanding?
Yeah, the moon in the ninth. Firstly, moon, it's really weird because the moon in these houses, whether it's the third or the ninth, I often see there's sleep disturbance or sleep difficulty because the moon is that sort of impressionable, subconscious, and when you're in that lunar slumber or that sleep, the nighttime in the moon, the dreams can be really vivid or the communication can be really strong, and it can be sort of a sleep disturbance. I remember, I don't know, very briefly after having my son, they had to whip him off to the NICU. And, I just was high on hormones. I just had a baby. And then I whip out Solar Fire on my phone. And I said to the midwife, oh, what was his birth time? And anyway, I put it in and I'm like, oh no, I'm going to have not a good sleeper. And of course, he's a shocker. He's got the moon in the third. I'm sorry, I digress, and you'll have to remind me what the question is.
Sure. Does the moon in the opposite house to its joy, that is to say the ninth, have, could that mean extra work of deliverance from minuscular activity into a grander understanding.
Yeah, there's a certain kind of like loftiness, I think, sometimes about the moon in the ninth or having Cancer on the ninth. So that will be the case for Scorpio risings. There is this sort of, I don't know, I see that it can be an easier embodiment of ninth house themes. If we go back to what Firmicus said about the ninth house, he talked about like being able to cultivate rites of passage for most important religions, or carry on business for women. So I do find that the moon and the ninth can definitely, I don't know, there's like more of an impressionable idea here with ninth house topics. That might just be the desire to travel all the time. Maybe it's the desire to learn about many things. I have a friend who, just trying to think here, what's in the ninth? I think it's Saturn and Venus, maybe, with the MC in Cancer. So obviously the moon flavors there, and they have PhD in comparative religion. So there is such a flavor coming through that will have that sort of spiritual ninth house, but it also can be very academic too. Like, I've seen plenty of people with like the moon in the ninth, and they are lawyers, but they might defend people who are like the maybe scandalous women, or people who are sort of maybe like isolated or poor, or carers of children. So I have seen that come up before. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not. But I do think there's naturally a connection to, maybe, as you said, those more grander things. Because you're not, like, the ninth house is still work, but it's a superior trine to the ascendant. So maybe the work comes more naturally or comes more easily. It's just there. It's almost like you don't have to devote yourself to it quite as much because it's already there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that does make sense.
Mm.
Okay, question from Raimundo. Can you speak a little bit about the meaning of transits to each outer planet, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, through the third house of a natal chart?
The transits. Wow. Okay. That's a lot. Okay. I mean, I guess like if it's Uranus, for example, it is going to perhaps destabilize or suggest changes to those rituals or daily habits. It might literally bring, change in your local area, the people you contact with in your daily round. It could also just be, I've seen it show up as a very creative type of, whether it's writing or whether it's learning, like there's those kind of like, Uranus is impacting a part of the sky that talks about like lunar memory or the Mercury type of mind. And so it can maybe jolt the memory or perhaps activate it in some way. If it's Neptune, well, obviously you might get a little bit lost in these things, or feel a little bit discombobulated around it, or maybe just feel really pulled or drawn, like I have to do something of a spiritual or devotional nature. Or maybe the Neptune transit could also feel the loss of what you thought you already had as well. So it can kind of go both ways. And then, of course, Pluto, well, that's a big one for sure. And, just the long nature of that transit, it's going to bring so many things. But by and large, I wouldn't put a lot of emphasis on the outer planets transiting through the third house unless you had planets in them. That's going to be a little bit more of a potent energy there.
All right, so we are closing in on 2 hours,
Mhm.
and we should let you get to bed soon. So let me just show everyone where they will be able to find the replay of this talk and what's coming up for tomorrow. So you can see the Nightlight website up on the screen.
Sure can.
Okay, wonderful. All right, everybody. So you will be able to find the replay of this talk if you go to nightlightastrology.com, events, speaker series. Scroll down. The replay will be available beginning on Monday, and it will be up for 7 days. And if you are a currently enrolled student, if you're an active student in one of Achuda's programs, you will also receive the recording to your course page. And here you can find all of the links to Cassandra's socials, website, etc. Definitely check her out. Get a reading if you want to before she does her little reading sabbatical, her little sabbatical for writing, right?
I'll be in my Saturn in the 3rd period of each year.
Wonderful. Yeah. And then join us tomorrow, if you are able to, for Dr. Peter Young's talk on taking back the helm. He'll be talking about the ascendant. And that talk is going to be at 12 p.m. Eastern time. Somebody let me know that the reminder that went out had said 12 p.m. Central time. No, it's going to be at 12 p.m. Eastern time. So we look forward to seeing everyone there. And Cassandra, thank you so much for joining us. I'm always amazed at how well you do at these late hours of the night.
I actually had a can of Monster before I started, so that helped.
Confessions.
I had a coffee and I was like, no, it's making me sleepy. I have to go for the Monster. Sugar-free, but still, it was nice, refreshing. But no, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. And I hope that this has helped just shine a bit of a different light or a different angle on the house that kind of gets a little bit glazed over or forgotten about.
Yeah, definitely. I know the 3rd has been described as the junk drawer of the zodiac. So I think we've organized the junk drawer a little bit more.
The miscellaneous file. Yes. Junk drawer. That's a good one. I might use that next time.
All right. Wonderful. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cassandra, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I hope that you all have a lovely rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.